All right, let's hop back in and get some more of your questions answered. When did Maggie first conceive Hershel Jr.? Did it happen during the time skip from early season 4A? I know she said it was a pregnancy scare from one of the scenes, but what if she wasn't lying? Or did she conceive sometime after Coda when she talked to Glenn about going to the ocean? I mean, I don't think we really know exactly, but my guess would be that it was sometime during season 5. I don't think that they would have lied about it being a pregnancy scare at the prison, or that she would have lied to Glenn about that. So I always saw that as more of a foreshadow that eventually she was going to get pregnant. And, we kind of knew that from the comic books anyway. So it was sometime after that, I would think, that she conceived. And, she and Glenn were separated for a long time during season 4 and searching for each other. And then they had a big reunion in the tunnel. And, I would just imagine that once they were alone, that's just going to happen. And that's probably when she conceived, because they were really, really happy to see each other and really, really happy to have both survived and all of that. So that would be my guess. Because if the thing they said at the prison was a pregnancy scare, and then we know for sure she was pregnant in 601 when they were doing Operation Lead the Walkers Away. So that means it has to be sometime between basically the end of season. It really has to be the end of season 4, I guess, because they reunited at the end of season 4, but they were in a big group and then they ended up at Terminus. So I would imagine sometime during season 5. But again, they're not real specific about that, so I couldn't say for sure. That would just be my best guess. Next one. Maggie's doing it again and it bugs me. Why doesn't she talk about Tara, Enid, and Tammy Rose? She left Tara in charge of Hilltop when she left with Georgie, and Enid was very close to her. Someone who was like a comic version of Sophia in the TV show. And Tammy didn't agree Maggie's leadership and was probably still bitter to her about Ken's death until her own death. Why? She never talked or uttered Beth's name at all for years since 510, all the way to season 10. As Beth fans, it hurts to feel that writers are doing disservice like that. Well, I know it's frustrating, but what I always say about this is that I think it is done purposefully and not to be hurtful to us, but because they have a whole plan behind it, First of all, you got to understand how little screen time they have. It might seem like a lot to us, but if they're constantly talking about characters that have already passed, that's all they would do for every episode. You know what I mean? They just don't have the time, if they want to play out the character arcs and focus on the character arcs, to constantly be talking about characters that are now deceased on the show. If something about that character became relevant again, then that's different. If something about Tara or something about Enid became relevant, then they'll talk about it and that it'll show up on the show. So, a really good example of this, actually, it doesn't have to do with Maggie, but in The Ones Who Live, remember Rick and Michonne were talking, and Michonne said, okay, there's some reason that you gave up and stopped trying to get away from the CRM. What was it? What did they take from you? And he finally broke down and told her it was Carl, that he stopped being able to remember Carl and dream about Carl. Now, you could complain that they just don't talk about Carl enough on the show. Since he died back in season 8, he's hardly ever mentioned, right? But that's because he passed away. But in this case, he became relevant to Rick's arc. So they talked about him and even showed clips of him, right? So that's why. It's only going to happen when it's really relevant to what's going on in the show or to what the character is currently going through. And, you could say that about Beth too, as much as people don't want to hear that. Obviously, we think that a lot of Daryl's arc has been about Beth and a lot of him being sad and being withdrawn, and I 100% agree with that. But they're specifically trying to hide that a little bit, that it's about her, because they didn't want to hint at her coming back. And because, what we all say that's a little bit frustrating is they don't want to necessarily alienate other shippers. But more than anything else, I think it has to do with the fact that they had to get through the comic book material, and Beth is not part of the comic book material. So they just kind of said, okay, well, we're going to kind of show, things Daryl is going through. Obviously, he's a big part of the story, but we're not going to get really deep into his characterization and deep into his head and what he's thinking about and why he's having a hard time with that, because we have to focus on the comic book storylines, which were Alexandria, and then All Out War, and then the Whisperers, right? And eventually the Commonwealth. So I really do think that's why. And it was just a choice they made, because if they start veering off into other arcs, then they're not focusing on the comic book arc. And already, they had too many storylines going on, too many characters. People, did get frustrated that they were bringing too many new characters on that we just didn't care that much about. And if they're on top of that are trying to follow storylines that have nothing to do with the comic books, it's just going to be too complicated on screen. And I believe that because Gimple always knew that he would do the Beth and Daryl storyline after they got through the comic book material, he was willing to put it aside and focus on those things, knowing that he would be returning to it and giving it its due. So that's my opinion about it. And I think that, even though that's not necessarily about Maggie, it applies to all characters across the board. You could say, why does Maggie not talk about her father, Hershel? Why does Michonne not talk about Andrea? They were best friends when we saw them for the first time in season 3. Things like that. But you just can't spend every episode talking about deceased characters, because they have a lot of character arcs to go through and a lot of story to tell. So try not to see it as a disservice, even though it can be a little bit frustrating. It just is the way that they've had to conduct the story for the sake of actually getting it done and getting it made. All right. Thanks for the question. I just realized that we learned about Duane's death in season 3 of The Walking Dead. They didn't show his body in TWD, yet they managed to bring his walker ass in freaking season 8 of Fear the Walking Dead to give him a closure, but Beth's body is still missing. That is absolutely intentional. 100% agree. I love the way you put that. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add, but yeah, 100% agree. I always say this, but Gimple does not leave loose ends. I mean, another example of this is that he brought Morales back 8 seasons after he was a minor character. So 8 seasons after a minor character disappeared, only to have him on screen for 5 minutes and then have Daryl kill him. And that seems ridiculous almost that they would go to the trouble to do that. But this is my point. Gimple does not leave loose ends dangling, ever. And there are about 50,000 loose ends around Beth's death. So I always, maybe this isn't everybody's favorite thing for me to say, but whether she's alive or not, he has to go back and tell us what happened. Those loose ends have to be tied up from Gimple's point of view. Okay, that's just the way that he operates. And obviously, I believe that when those come back around, she's going to be alive, because why would they wait so long? Why would they put all the mystery in? Why would they do everything they did only to be like, oh yeah, she died? That doesn't make any sense, guys. So obviously she's going to be alive. But even if she weren't, I mean, I'm just saying, eventually Gimple will always come back around and tie up the loose ends. So they have to tell us something. They have to show us that footage. And we have not been shown it yet. And so as long as the footage is still being withheld, I will hold out hope that she will be back. I 100% believe she will be. So just another example of that is, yes, Duane's body, and the fact that we didn't really see it and we didn't really find out what happened to it until they were, kind of finishing up Morgan's really long arc at the end of Fear the Walking Dead. So yeah, definitely. And in a way it shows too that you have to get to that point in the arc, which, Daryl's coming to that point in his arc where he's going to need to face what happened. And you know what I mean? It was the perfect time, I guess is what I'm saying, for that to happen with Morgan as they closed that part of his arc. And now we're at the perfect time for Daryl to finally run back into Beth. So yeah. Thank you for that question. I heartily agree. All right. I am totally new. Can someone honestly tell me which ship pair of Daryl, Dixon, Norman Reedus like most, or he wants that ship to sail? Please answer, and which is the biggest ship of TWD? So I think you're asking who Norman wants Daryl to be with, like what ship does he like? And what is the biggest ship? Well, those are some different questions, and I don't know that we can really speak for Norman and say for sure which ship he wants. But I'll just kind of talk about some things that have been said over the years. Which is the biggest ship of TWD? I mean, I would argue that Beth and Daryl are, and obviously some people would disagree with me, because we actually have a lot of evidence about how many people were always on board with Beth and Daryl. There's the spoon campaign. People were sending in spoons to the writers to express their anger at, what happened in Coda and ask them to bring her back. And then there was also a petition that got like 60,000 names. And guys, that's unheard of. It really is. I mean, in terms of, there's a lot of people who will watch any show. And at the height of TWD fame, you know, which was in season 5, was one of the most watched seasons. And yeah, there was like 20 million people watching every week or whatever. But most of those are not even, I wouldn't even say casual fans, like they tune in every week, so they're loyal to the show, but that's all they do is tune in every week. They don't get online, they don't talk about things, you know, it's a much smaller portion of the fandom that will actually get online and discuss everything and create memes and create fan fictions and create theories and all of that. So when somebody sends around a petition like that, most of the fandom just ignores it, you know, and it's not likely to get more than usually a few hundred, maybe a few thousand names, depending on the popularity of the show, but 60,000 names. And my point here is that whatever names go on that petition is a small fraction of the people who are actually shipping it. So if there were 60,000 names on that list, it's like in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who were shipping Beth and Daryl at the time. And we have not seen that with any other ship. Yes, there are plenty of other ships out there, and each one has plenty of fans and people who follow it, but not in those numbers. And even the Daryl and Carol shippers, they're very loud online, and they're a decent sized ship, but we've never seen anything like that outside the internet. You know, it's more like they're just very loud on the internet, and that's still a relatively small portion of the fan base. So in terms of what is the biggest ship, my contention would be that Beth and Daryl is. In terms of what Norman likes, again, I don't want to try and speak for him. So overall, we don't know. That's just going to kind of be my official answer. However, what I can tell you is that, number one, Norman always said that he trusted the writers and he would have been good with anything they did. So there was talk that they even considered in the early seasons maybe making him a gay character, and they didn't go that route, obviously, but Norman would have been okay with that. I think if they had decided to get Daryl and Carol together, he would have been okay with that. He does like Daryl and Carol's dynamic on screen, and he likes their relationship. Is he upset that they're not going to be romantic? No, he's not at all. And he's even come out and said that they've been together too long now, and they're squarely in the friend zone and have been since like season 3. Excuse me. And so it would be weird now if they suddenly became romantic, you know. But if they had decided to go that route early on, I think he would have been okay with that. And then I do remember that he came out and said something, and I'm totally going to be paraphrasing. I don't remember what it was, and no, I don't have a reference because it's a really old interview. But he just basically talked about how, even though I think he was always fine with Beth and Daryl, you know, what I'm envisioning is that at some point Gimple told him, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. And it's just because that's how Norman is. He's very go with the flow. He trusts the writers. So if they say, this is what we're going to do for Daryl's love life, he's on board. He's not going to, unless it was something completely ridiculously out of character, he's not going to rail against it. He just trusts the writer. So he was probably fine with it being Beth, right? But then he specifically talked about when they were filming still, and when they were filming the scene on the porch, that he really started to feel the Bethyl vibes. And when he smiles at her, that's genuine, because he could feel their chemistry and he could feel the way the characters were connecting. And so where at first he was just perfectly okay with it, but maybe didn't have an opinion one way or the other, by the time they finished shooting still, he was so on board, and he really, really liked it, and could just really, really feel what all the fans felt and what all the other actors felt, who, remember, all the other actors came out too and said that they really liked it, and they liked watching it, you know, as a member of the audience. It was just fun, and they really liked Beth and Daryl's dynamic. Like, I know Lauren Cohen said that, and several of the others too. So I do think that he ships Beth and Daryl, and especially because he's known that that's what it's going to be for a really long time now. Of course he does, you know. But has he ever came out and said that he likes one ship over another? No. And he's probably never going to, you know. I think once it's revealed that she is alive and they get into it, then of course he'll promote it. But they've just been really careful not to alienate fans, which I know frustrates a lot of TD, but it's also their job, and, you know, they just have to handle things kind of delicately, because this is a big show, and it has a lot of fans, and, you know, it's a business. So not alienating fans is not a way to hurt other fans. It's a way to just be vigilant about their business and make sure that they aren't alienating customers, really. So you just kind of have to understand that about it. There is that aspect. So I hope that answers your question. Like I said, we don't know for sure, and I don't like speaking for him, but that's just things that I have heard and kind of gleaned over the years. Okay, let's stop there, and I will be back in a few days with some more. Everyone have a lovely day. Bye.